Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at
podcast.hillsdale.edu. Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means the Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, is with me. We are in the Battle of Antwerp, and the Battle of the Marne has just concluded. We didn't get to this last week, and I meant to do it. Dr. Arnn, good morning to you. Moltke knew he had lost the war after the Marne. Isn't that amazing? He wrote to the emperor, Majesty, we have lost the war. How do you suppose the emperor received that?
Yeah, that was a bad one. And see, remember what those guys were thinking, right? They were, in my opinion, the regime of Kaiser William II, the son of the great Kaiser whose chief aide was Bismarck, who founded modern Germany. It was reckless, right? But also it knew it was on the edge, right? We got this huge problem in both directions. And the Germans, in military-age young men, they counted this kind of thing back then, because war is waste bodies. Maybe it doesn't anymore, but if it gets really bad, it will. And then the Russians are more numerous than the Germans. And so they just got enemies, right? And so they made this dashing plan to win in a hurry, and they had the example of the wars that founded Germany in the late 19th century, that they could pull that off, maybe. Well,
isn't it bad that Germany won so easily in 1870? And I'm applying this to American history. We won very easily in 1991 in Iraq. We won very easily at the early phase of Afghanistan. And then we won the march to Baghdad very easily in 2003. It might be a bad thing to win easily, Dr. Arnn. What do you think?
Well, Churchill wrote of people unteachable from infancy to tomb. But one thing that teaches us is hardship. And we're seeing hardship now, right? If it were I'm actually in some ways glad that it's not I, because I have a better job than any job I could get in the government. But if it were I would be building weapons. Like I would go to the people and say, the first priority is to repair our manufacturing base at speed, and then use it and build, right, and get ready. And there's some confusion about what to build, because it's possible that our aircraft carriers are not sustainable. And apparently the Chinese are days from launching an aircraft carrier that has the same launching capacity as our USS Ford about to be launched. So they're getting more formidable, right?
Aircraft carriers remain very useful for things like Yemen, but not for great power conflict with China. Let me ask you about that. Not far from you is a town called Green Bay, Wisconsin, where they are building frigates, which are guided missile frigates, which are vital to the next 25 to 50 years of the American. And we do not have enough welders, Dr. Arnn, in this country to move up. They cannot hire. I know the head of the shipyard. He's a great man to work for. Mark, if you're listening. And they'll hire a welder from anywhere, and they'll be working there for 25 years, but we haven't got welders. What the heck happened?
When I was in high school, I was a welder for a summer.
Oh, I'm worried about whatever you welded.
Pretty good at it. And when I read about they need welders, I think, hey, I'm going to go take a month and go be a welder. It'd be fun. Welding is cool. And, you'd have to be more skilled than I was, but I could weld aluminum, which is very hard. And,
I just think it's amazing to me that the government does not have a website. The one thing they could do is pass information around about where there are great jobs to be had. by young men and women who want a career for 30 years building the weapons that we need?
No, there's a kid. He's not a kid anymore. He's a man, but he's a graduate. He's a friend of mine named Luke. And he's bought up a bunch of property in this town and going to beautify the town. God bless his efforts. And he wants to start a trade school in Hillsdale, Michigan. And I think that's just a brilliant idea.
That is a brilliant idea.
There are some people and we're having all this argument about trillions in debt that we have for a trillion something for student loans, right? And the completion rates in college are just pitiful, right? Whereas there was a woman, inspiring woman, who's got a big company. Her father ran it and her grandfather ran it. And they make big steel structure chimneys for big plants. And they need welders. And so she started a welding school. And you could become a welder in 21 weeks. And you could get a job making $85,000. And, I know all about this because she decided they're going to take part of that 21 weeks and have a civics curriculum.
Good
and
for
we provided
them.
The civics.
Do you know, there's also
great?
a high school, I learned this in Orange County. You have the Orange County Classical Academy. Catholics are coming, the low-income Catholics. They're going to open up a high school. There are 30 of them across the country. That's going to be open Monday through Thursday. The family income can't be above $80,000. On Friday, you will work for an employer who will pay for your tuition to the private Catholic school so that at the end of the 4 years, you'll have a good high school education, good Catholic high school education, and you'll have the skills that come from working, say, at an automobile dealer 8 hours a day every Friday. I think that will be a much better student than the average American's high school produces. What do you think?
At the end of his career, my father, the school teacher, ran a program like that, as well as being a regular classroom teacher. And he just loved that, and he would go, he would teach the kids in class, for an hour a week, how to be a good employee, show up on time, tuck your shirt in, all that stuff, work hard. And he'd go talk to the employers 1 day a week is how he did it, about how the kids were doing. And then he would counsel them about how to be a better employee. And they all had jobs when they got out of high school. And see, in other words, we should stop, if we could just understand ourselves again. There's two things we have to understand. The first is this is a bottom-up country. All its strength comes from that. The grand national plan is important in a war, but otherwise should be rare. And the second thing is we're outnumbered. We're a little place. 15% of the world's people live in North and South America. 85% live in Eurasia and Africa. And so we should think of leverage all the time. We should do things that are cheap. I went to India. We talked about it, right? People want me to start schools in India. And they just love schools in India. And in India, a poor country, average income $2,000 or $3,000 a year, families spend 25% of their income on school, and half the kids are educated in private schools. And they're better, and they do great. And so we centralize things. Everything is a grand national plan.
I think whoever the Republican nominee is, if they spend time talking about the border, education, and defense, they will win. The border, education, and defense. That's it. Dr. Arnn, we've got to get started on Antwerp, because I didn't know anything about this either. And, I've read every Churchill biography that you've written, and Andrew Roberts have written, and Martin Gilbert's written, and William Manchester, and somehow I'd forgotten Antwerp. This is really quite an episode. Antwerp, you say, Antwerp and Churchill? There's a lot of Antwerp and Churchill. Be back to it. Everything Hillsdale is at hillsdale.edu. All of the prior Hillsdale Dialogues, and we're getting close to 900, Hugh4Hillsdale.com. Hugh, H-U-G-H-F-O-R, Hillsdale.com. But for your applications for your kids, or if you're yourself a teenager and you want to go to a serious place for college, head over to hillsdale.edu.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding. And we want you, or your son or daughter, to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. That music tells you we are in the Hillsdale Dialogue, the last radio hour of the week. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Every single one of the Hillsdale Dialogues, quickly approaching 900 of them, are found at hughforhillsdale.com. But we're going to a specific city in Europe right now, Antwerp. And what does Churchill have to do with Antwerp? If you don't know, you're just like me. Somehow I'd forgotten Antwerp. This is really quite an episode. Just tell us, this is not where Churchill should be, but it tells us much about Churchill.
So it's important. And I've thought a little more about why Churchill edited out the account of the Battle of the Marne. And there's one thing that's for sure, and remember, I don't know his motive. He didn't write it as far as I know. But I do know that the book makes sense without all this, because the effect of the victory at the Marne and the effect of the delay at Antwerp was the war became long and horrible.
Yep.
It wasn't, instead of a quick German victory. So what happened at Antwerp is the German armies coming down and, through Belgium, violate their territory, an act of aggression that's certainly wrong. And they signed a paper saying they wouldn't do that. And they get to Antwerp, and Antwerp is important because sea, resupply, big harbor. And anyway, there's a big garrison there, and if they bypass it, they risk what happened in the Battle of the Marne. The troops can come out of the fort and attack them in the rear. And Churchill is the First Lord of the Admiralty, and he's got one big group of troops called the Royal Naval Division. And he sees the importance of Antwerp. He knows what's going on. He knows the Germans are trying to win fast by encircling Paris. And so he can delay them here. And so he sends the Royal Naval Division to reinforce the Belgium. And then the next thing because, he was a wild man, he's over there taking part in command of the troops. And he's running the British Navy. And he cables the cabinet at one point. They thought it was weird and unsettling and said, maybe I should just assume command here and get somebody else to run the Navy. He's going to resign from the cabinet, right? Just, his blood was up, but it did a lot of good because... Well,
there was no general on the ground either. Eventually a general shows up, but the Belgium are folding up like waffles. He reinforced them. And see, the Belgians... I'd like to say to all the people who think that we wouldn't have any wars if we never attacked anybody, I always say that's the American perspective, and there's something to it. And we should take advantage of the fact that we have relative isolation, although not as much as we used to, missiles and all, and planes. But what if you're Belgium? That means that's not a theory, right? A theory would be something, or it's not a universal principle. It would have to always be true. That doesn't work for Belgium because Belgium had a treaty with Germany. And Belgium never had a day where it got up in the morning thinking we're going to beat the Germans, right? We got to be peaceful with them. And they got attacked anyway. And, they wouldn't let the German army pass, violation of Belgian sovereignty. And that's why they were attacked. They just wanted to go through. But the Germans had planned that for 30 years. And they weren't, and they weren't in neither World War. I don't want to slander the Belgians as a great people, but it didn't stick very long. I want to ask you if you think the burden of history in Europe, and it burdens us today. You mentioned Marlborough last week. It was all siege warfare. and you knew how to do a siege. A siege had a set group of steps in it, and you either pulled them off or you didn't pull them off. All of this is new. Churchill writes that the siege of Antwerp is the first one that is done with across an open field without trenches. They just blow it to pieces with this heavy artillery. So it's all new. Right. It's completely new. That's right. And I worry about now, because I saw on the web the day before we saw this, the Ukrainians sent a drone up, little tiny drone, and a Soviet tank, a $40 million tank is rolling down the road in Ukraine, and this little drone with a camera approaches it and destroys it from the back. And we'll talk about what that means for the future of warfare with Dr. Arnn. When a drone can take out a $40 million tank, things are changing. Churchill dealt with that. Everything Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. We'll be back with the Hillsdale Dialogue right after this. Churchill in the beginning of World War I. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That's Dr. Larry Arnn. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is a constant. It's always Friday. They're all collected at HughForHillsdale.com. All things Hillsdale at Hillsdale.edu. What is not a constant is warfare. War is constantly changing, and we're watching it in real time right now. Things have changed a lot, Dr. Arnn, in the last 5 years.
Oh, yeah. We should read parts of the Marlborough when we finish The World Crisis. It's a very great book. It rivals this book, in my opinion, for Churchill's best book. And in the Marlborough, he says, in a wonderful chapter called The Structure of the War, where he actually gives a systematic account of human prudence that's just like Aristotle, in my opinion. But in it, he introduces this discussion by saying in every war, there's some novelty of firearms or maneuver that changes it from previous wars. Well, that's happening incredibly fast now.
And I hope that I want to think that our Pentagon and our generals are reading this book and that they are thinking about these things. I don't know. Do you teach World War I? Do you ever, in your Churchill studies, do you teach this book?
Oh, yeah.
Because it really is a revolutionary moment in history where you see what happens when you're not prepared. Let me move on to the Special Naval Brigade that you mentioned. At the special request of the Belgian staff, Churchill writes, they were to be interspersed, the British naval brigades, with the Belgian divisions to impart the encouragement and assurance that succor was at hand. That seemed to me to be applicable to a lot of things besides war. To take your best, I'm wondering if it's applicable at the college, to take your best and intersperse them with those who are perhaps least able or least enthused?
So with the students, they sort themselves out. You know, a few fail, a few shine. They all shine. But, you know, the success rates here are very high, right? But remember the core. So what we do to the students is, first of all, the core, which approaches half the curriculum, is the same for everybody. Physics, chemistry, biology, literature, philosophy, theology, economics, politics, all that. Everybody's got to do that. Full semester course, 2 semester courses in some cases. So then they pick a major, and that's sort of the other half plus a bit. And they go where they want to there. And so, you know, the most popular majors are biology is in there, history, economics, politics, a few like that. They cross into the natural sciences. You know, chemistry is very popular here, physics. I'll be careful what I say about this, but the people who teach physics and chemistry sometimes feel superior to the people who teach biology. They will claim that there's more math in those subjects, but you know, everybody's got to take math here. And let me brag. Among liberal arts colleges, there have been only 2 who've had consistently 10% of their graduates majoring in a math subject, and those are Williams and Amherst. And this year's graduating class at Hillsdale College has 11.5%.
Congratulations.
And, oh, yeah. Well, they're nerds over there.
I was going to say that's going to not do well for the social life of the college, but actually, I'm sure math people are. What do they go on to do?
Well, whatever they want. They, first of all, a lot of them go to graduate school.
Yeah.
And then they become doctor nerds. Actuaries, finance, they do lots of things. And they've studied all the other subjects too, right? So they're not simply nerds. And they're, the math department here, well, many of our departments, but math is a very shining department.
Well, they can run the artillery. Churchill could run artillery because he knew math. And my brother-in-law was an artillery engineer, and he can do math, so I can't do math. Let me go back to Churchill. There are two things I want to make sure I cover this hour. Page 278. Churchill writing, I now found myself suddenly, unexpectedly, and deeply involved in a tremendous and hideously critical local situation, which might well continue for some time. I had also assumed a very direct responsibility for exposing the city to bombardment for bringing in the Royal Naval Division. I felt it was my duty to see the matter through. So he had totally bound up Antwerp into the war, so he was not going to leave. I think that says something about his integrity.
Yeah, well, it's, it was that. He did, this is, if you have to pick the biggest thing in the war, it's the Battle of Verdun, right? And that's terrible and huge and goes on for months and months. There's a little video we might put on our website about they show it at the museum of the Battle of Verdun, and they built a whole railway system. The Germans had one and the French had one, and they were both just pouring men and munitions into Verdun as a major transport operation for months. And they were pouring all that in there, and they were killing each other with it. And, the casualties were more than 1 million, if I remember correctly. But this is not like that. This is a moment early in the war when the decision was reached whether there's going to be a long war or a quick war for the Germans. And we knew that it wasn't going to be a quick war for the French and the British when the Schlieffen Plan succeeded as far as it did. Because now there's 2 million, I think it was, German soldiers on French soil. It's not going to be easy to get them out.
And the key here is we're involved in the so-called race to the sea, which I want to make sure you explain to people. That's why Antwerp matters, is it allows the Brits to win. I don't know if they win, but at least it's a draw. Is that the best way to say it?
Well, it's funny what happened. Same thing happened in the Second World War. There's chaos and confusion and danger, and the British and the French armies headed for home. So the French army ended up on the right, closer to Paris, and the British army ended up on the left, closer to the English Channel and London. And in the Second World War, that was exaggerated because they were severed. The French was broken up and conquered, and the British made it to Dunkirk. But in this case, and here's an interesting fact, a man who was a friend of Churchill's, who had grown up in France, a close friend, wrote two of the best books about the first and opening of the First and Second World War, because he was a British man named Edward Lewis Spears, who was appointed the liaison officer between the British and the French armies, both in 1914 and in 1940. And so he was there when all that's going on. The first book, the First World War book, is called Liaison 1914. It's very worth reading. He's very literate, very funny, and he was very close to Winston Churchill. In fact, when Winston Churchill lost his seat in an election right after the First World War, Spears was elected for the first time, and he immediately wrote to Churchill and offered Churchill his seat. But he was present in these conversations. In the Second World War, he was present in those final conversations between the British and the French where the French decided to abandon Paris and eventually to give up. And those were very tense conversations. And he wrote the notes that are the best notes. And his book about the Second World War is called Assignment to Catastrophe. Well, here, in this incredible stress of the first success of the Schlieffen Plan and then the reverse at the Battle of the Marne, then the Germans can't go any farther east and south because they've been reversed. And so they both start trying to flank each other, and that drives them toward the sea.
And they're driving. They're both trying to get to the sea first so they can get around each other.
Get around, and there's attacks constantly while they make these maneuvers, and they're digging trenches. And so what they did was they whacked each other in a series of moves toward the sea, the British and the French from the south and the west, and the Germans from the north and the east, and they dig trenches as they go. And those would eventually, over the next 4 years, become very elaborate living quarters, miserable. And the Germans are stuck for a time at Antwerp over days that mattered because the British didn't have those forces hammering them while they're racing to the sea. The Germans were delayed.
Yeah.
And Churchill had a lot to do with that.
Churchill had everything to do with it. Don't go anywhere, Dr. Arnn. I got a break here. Churchill had a lot to do with that. In fact, if you don't do anything else, just read the first volume of The World Crisis. There are 5 volumes. And Dr. Arnn and I are not going to do all 5 volumes in the way that we're doing volume 1. I have been doing my notes for the next 3 or 4 shows, and we're going to begin to tackle the Dardanelles. We're going to tackle the development of the tank. We're going to tackle the entry of the United States into the war. We're going to tackle a lot of things about World War I that you've not heard before, because most Americans don't study them. But boy, it's actually eerie. If you go back to the beginning in the Hillsdale Dialogues when we started talking about the world crisis, and that would mean go to hughforhillsdale.com or hillsdale.edu and roll back about 20. I think we've done about 20 episodes on World War I, the book 1 in the world crisis. No matter how many we've done, start at the beginning and move forward. It's very prescient. It is spooky, actually. That's the best word to use for it, spooky. The times that we are living in have so much in common, not with 1938, but with 1914. And what happened suddenly, even though it was there in plain sight, what would happen, it's the same thing we are staring at right now. All of the Hillsdale materials are at hillsdale.edu, including your application, young people and parents. Hillsdale.edu. You can sign up for Imprimis. But all of the Hillsdale Dialogues are available at Hugh for Hillsdale. We wrap up this week. When we come back, don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That's Dr. Larry Arnn. Stay tuned.
The book of Exodus is one of the central narratives of the Bible. It recounts the moment when God rescues his people from slavery in Egypt and gives them the 10 Commandments to guide their moral and religious freedom. But how well do you actually know the story? In Hillsdale College's new, free online course, The Exodus Story, you'll learn the spiritual significance of the Old Testament's most epic book. In The Exodus Story, Hillsdale College professor of English, Justin Jackson, picks up the biblical narrative where his course on Genesis ended. Join Dr. Jackson in learning about the nature of God's mercy, human freedom, and the relationship between the divine and man. Discover the beauty of God reclaiming the Israelites through his mercy and love in The Exodus Story. To enroll today and secure your spot in this completely free online course, visit hillsdale.edu/new course. That's NEWCOURSE. Hillsdale.edu/new course.
Welcome back, America. Of all the music, and we use the same music every week for the Hillsdale Dialogue, I think this is my favorite. I really do. I don't have to leave it up to Dr. Arnn. He's never asked me to change it. All things Hillsdale are at hillsdale.edu. If you want to listen to all the prior Hillsdale Dialogues between Dr. Arnn and his colleagues and me, they're all collected at hughforhillsdale.com. All right, Hugh, H-U-G-H-F-O-R, Hillsdale.com. You'll get hundreds of them because we've been doing this for a long time because we have a project underway. The project is to make you an educated person, make sure you know what you're talking about. In this case, make sure you know about World War I. Back to my conversation with Dr. Arnn. There are two people in here I want to mention. One is Admiral Oliver that Churchill brings up, who's in charge of blowing up every merchant ship in the Antwerp harbor. He has 3 soldiers and a Boy Scout. And he wires every single ship to blow up in Antwerp harbor. And then General Rawlinson, who finally gets there and takes over. He's an army man, not like Churchill, Navy man. But Churchill said he possessed, quote, an innate instinctive revolt against acquiescing in the will of the enemy, which is an invaluable quality in military men. And I asked myself, did Churchill's World War II staff read his World War I memoir closely to find out what he valued in military men?
Well, I don't know. I do know that it was a very popular book. This book sold like crazy. Churchill made his living writing books, and he was in all of the wars, beginning with Afghanistan in 1896, in Sudan in 1898, in the First World War, the Second World War. He was a spy in Cuba, so he didn't write about that till later. In South Africa, he was the most widely read commentator on all those wars. And you said he was not at the time we're talking about right now in the Army. He was the head of the Navy. But, of course, all of his military service, which was extensive, was in the Army. And,
I have to close by this. Later. This came up. Your friend and mine, Karl Rove, is coming to California. So I've been reading his book about McKinley. And in the book about McKinley comes up a fellow named Burke Corcoran, who is a...
Burke Cochran.
That's it. A friend of Jenny, Churchill's husband, paramour. And Churchill is alleged to say that he taught Churchill how to talk. Is that true? I mean, he learned how rhetoric was from this Irish-American politician from New York.
Yeah, Burke Cochran was an anti-progressive Democrat.
Yeah.
And he would fill Madison Square Garden with his speeches. And Churchill became very close to him. He was a mentor to him, which is what Churchill's mother, Jenny, after Churchill's father died, asked Burke Cochran to do. And Churchill admired him so much that in the very great Fulton speech in 1946, the Iron Curtain speech, he quotes Burke Cochran. And that's 46 years after he knew him.
I don't know if you've read this McKinley book by Rove. It's been out for years, and I didn't read it until now. The election of 1896, when the gold Democrats break with the silver Democrats and join the Republicans and elect McKinley and eventually TR, there's a lot of similarity to today, Dr. Arnn. There's a lot.
Yeah, I'll confess that I have not read the book, but I want to. And the reason is I know Karl well, and I admire him. He's a very imaginative, fecund man, and he has talked to me about that book, and the enthusiasm with which he talks about it makes me confident that it's a really good book.
It is, except it's all about silver and gold, and I don't understand any of it because I'm not one of your math guys. But 16 to 1 was the great slogan of the era, and it's the populist undoing, and McKinley is on the front porch in Canton, Ohio, asking people to come to him. Everything's up in the air. Nothing is certain, and the country survives. That's the good news.
Yeah. The question about the politics of the day when you read history is, first of all, you find out that politics is always a mess. And so the question is not, are we in a mess? The question is, how big a mess? And I think this one is very big, but it's always a mess. And, if we could have back the political parties in the America of 1896, it would be a blessing to us. And you can
with women and integrated, it would be a blessing. Parties are good things. Parties, people misunderestimate, to use a George W. Bush phrase, the importance of party. Maybe we'll do that down the road. That's it for the time for this week's Hillsdale Dialogue. Next week, we're finally going to get to the Dardanelles, Dr. Arnn. We're finally going to get to the Dardanelles because We've gotten to the sea, we've gotten through the Marne, we've gotten through Antwerp, and we're stuck on the ground, and Churchill's looking for a way out, and we're going to do that next week on the next Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Indeed, we will be doing that, but don't forget the Hillsdale Dialogues that you missed. They're all collected at hughforhillsdale.com. If you want to find out how we got here, how we got past the Marne. Thank you, Richard, if you're listening, our Hillsdale expert up at Hillsdale. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Do not forget the application. Time is running out on applying for the class centers in the fall. You don't want to be left behind. It's one of the last places in America where you'll really get the sort of education that used to be commonplace in America, the sort of education that makes you well-rounded and ready for the world. Hillsdale.edu. All of the prior Hillsdale Dialogue at hughforhillsdale.com. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Harley. Thank you, Generalissimo. Thank you, Dr. Arnn. I'll see you on Monday on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.